It was the night of January 13th, 2012. A normal night, seemingly like so many others. However, in a matter of moments, that night would turn into an open wound that continues to bleed in the collective memory to this day. Costa Concordia, a giant from the sea, he was about to write one of the most tragic pages in modern maritime history. The Concordia was no ordinary ship. Upon its launch, it was hailed as a symbol of Italian pride, a floating city nearly 300 meters long, more than 30 meters wide, capable of carrying more than 4,000 passengers and crew, with its gleaming decks, restaurants, theaters, and swimming pools. It represented accessible luxury, the dream of those who wanted to escape the routine for a few days. Days and being lulled by the sea, a true showcase of modernity. It led to the Italian flag flew to ports all over the world. For years, it sailed the seas without problems, a symbol of power and security. Each trip was a promise, relaxation, fun, and carefree. Entire families left with the enthusiasm of those who know how to live happy days, far from the worries of everyday life. For many, the Concordia was more than just a means of transportation. Not just transportation, but the start of an adventure, the perfect setting for unforgettable memories. But behind the pomp and grandeur of that ship, no one could imagine the shadow that it hung in the air. No one could suspect that a human error, a bad choice, it would transform that symbol of beauty into a shipwreck, crushed on the Italian coast. That night, on board, there were families with children, newlyweds, tourists from all over the world. They laughed, dined, toasted. Many were at the theater, others strolling in the deck, a few enjoying the fresh sea air. A night of celebration, of serenity. But beneath that, beneath the surface of normalcy, fate was already at work, ready to turn everything upside down. A few minutes after 9:30 p.m., the Concordia was at the island of Giglio. The captain decided to get closer than necessary for a spectacular farewell, a gesture known at sea as reverence, a tradition, an act of vanity, a way to display the ship's grandeur. But this approach, so useless and risky, it would have irreversible consequences. A sudden bang broke the calm. The ship struck the Skull Rocks, hidden beneath the surface of the water, the sound of metal tearing. It echoed like thunder. The lights flickered. Glasses fell from the tables, the passengers. They looked around, bewildered. In a matter of seconds, that dream cruise had turned into a nightmare. The Concordia, the pride of Italy, began its slow descent into the abyss of history. At first, nobody really understood what had happened. Some passengers thought it was a technical failure, others a sudden maneuver. Many, accustomed to the idea that a cruise ship, it was indestructible, they clung to the hope that it was just a one-off, a temporary inconvenience. But those near the engine rooms immediately heard the water coming in, with a roar that left no room for doubt. The ship slowed abruptly. The lights flickered, and for a few seconds it went dark. The silence was broken by the sound of breaking plates, screams, and the crying of children. The corridors, illuminated by emergency lights, suddenly became narrow and suffocating. The Costa Concordia, which until a few minutes before was a kingdom of parties, once filled with joy, he was now overcome by fear. On the bridge, the reality was clear. The hull was shattered. Water was rushing into the compartments at an astonishing speed. Despite this, passengers were safe inside the ship. An announcement informed them that it was a power outage, a simple malfunction. We kindly ask that you return to your cabins. Everything is under control. We are making repairs. The electrical problem. But that forced calm, that attempt to mask the seriousness of the situation, didn't last long. Soon the ship began to list. At first, almost imperceptibly, like a slight rocking motion. Then, increasingly so, until people are forced to hold onto the walls to avoid falling. Glasses rolled off tables, chairs slipped the floor. It was no longer level. It was impossible not to understand. Something huge was happening. Passengers ran through the aisles, demanding information, shouting, searching for lifeboats. And while panic spread, Out there in the darkness of the sea, the inhabitants of the people of Giglio Island watched in disbelief. From the port, the ship could be seen listing, almost extinguished, with only a few lights tracing its outline in the night. For those on land, the sight was unreal. For those on board, it was the beginning of a desperate struggle for survival. The situation worsened by the minute. The Costa Concordia continued to list, slowly but inexorably. The aisles, they were no longer corridors. They had become slippery ramps, slopes that dragged objects along, luggage and people. The sloping floor made orientation difficult, making even the simplest gestures difficult. Walking, standing, finding a way out. Finally, after long minutes of hesitation, the order came to abandon ship, but the time lost, it would be fatal. The lifeboats were difficult to lower because the ship, it was already listing heavily to one side. Many of those on the starboard side, closer to the water, were unusable, while on the opposite side they had to be lowered with extreme difficulty, amidst shouts, shoves, and confusion. Passengers crowded onto the deck. Many were without coats, others still in their evening clothes, inadequate for the biting cold of the night. Some clung to loved ones or children, determined. They were no longer separated. There was no longer any difference between rich and poor. Everyone just wanted to survive. The screams mingled with cries and prayers. Some tried to remain calm, helping out the weakest among them. Others succumbed to panic. The evacuation was chaotic. Some boats got stuck, others were lowered with difficulty, and many decided to jump into the sea, braving the icy waters in the hope of reaching the shore. While chaos reigned on the ship, the first rescue operations began in the port of Giglio Island. Local fishermen, with their small boats, they plunged into the darkness to reach the listing ship and rescue it. Anyone they could find. They were ordinary men without training, but with a courage that night was more valuable than any protocol. The scene was surreal. A colossus of the sea tilted on its side, intermittently illuminated by flashing lights, while dozens of small boats rocked on the waves, rescuing men, women, and children. In those dramatic hours, fate, the lives of thousands of people depended on a fragile balance, suspended between fear and hope. From the continent, the news began to spread. Television, newspapers, social media. Everyone started talking about a cruise ship in danger off the coast of Tuscany. At first, it seemed like a malfunction, a technical problem, something that would be resolved quickly. But the images arriving from Giglio told a different story. They showed a white colossus, leaning to the side, with hundreds of people desperately seeking safety. What should have been a festive night was turning into a tragedy before their eyes, from Italy and the entire world. And as the night wore on, the Costa Concordia sank, increasingly trapped in the rocks, immobilized, but not yet defeated, transforming from a symbol of luxury and national pride, now a monument to human suffering and error. As the ship tilted further and further, the night seemed endless. Time, for those still on board, it no longer had any meaning. The minutes passed slowly, marked only by the metallic clang of the groaning hull, by the desperate cries. Those seeking help were alerted by the distant roar of engines that stopped one after another. Inside, rescuers moved in extreme conditions. Where before there had been clear and organized corridors, now gave way to winding passageways, walls that turned into floors and floors that looked like ceilings. Every meter traveled meant climbing, crawling, overcoming obstacles that only hours before they were luxury furniture. They were searching for survivors, knocking on doors, listening for the slightest sound, hoping to hear a voice answer. Outside, on the island, the emergency was total. The small community of Giglio, accustomed to the silence of the winter months, she suddenly found herself at the center of a global drama. The narrow streets filled with shipwrecked people, ambulances, and volunteers. Those who lived there offered everything they had: blankets, food, even their own beds. Each, an open door became a refuge. Each gesture of solidarity, a bulwark against the cold of fear. Meanwhile, at sea, the scene was unreal. The ship was now in darkness. Only a few, Autonomous lights flashed in the water, while helicopters circled above the wreckage, projecting beams of light that cut through the night like blades. From the sky, the disproportion was clearly visible. A giant white figure lying on the rocks, surrounded by small boats that looked like dots, but in reality, they were the thin line between life and death for those who managed to get aboard. Each rescue was a race against time. The rescuers knew that the deeper the ship sank, the lower the probability of finding people alive, the less likely they would find them. Even so, they continued searching without hesitation. From all sides, it was a battle of courage and despair, a tug-of-war with destiny. The night at the Concordia was long and cruel, but it also proved that, in the face of disaster, the courage of a few can become the hope of many. When dawn broke, there was no longer any doubt. The Costa Concordia would never, I would sail again. Seen in the sunlight, the ship off the island looked like a defeated giant, a white, motionless carcass, which revealed the enormity of the tragedy. On land, the survivors were gathered in makeshift shelters. The numbers were starting to become clear. Dozens of victims, hundreds of injured, many missing. Italy awoke to the image of a dream ship transformed into a shipwreck. And with a persistent question everywhere, how could this have been possible? While Italy mourned the victims and rescuers continued their search, with those missing on the ship, the first investigations began. The tragedy was not caused by a storm or a sudden failure. It was the consequence of a human choice, a maneuver that was too risky, a futile approach. Close to the coast, probably performed what is called a bowing maneuver, a close passage to the island to greet the inhabitants and display the majesty of the ship. The captain, Francesco Schettino, immediately became the focus of accusations, not only for having performed that risky maneuver, but also for having managed. The emergence was confusing and belated. After years of trial, the final sentence arrived in 2017. 16 years of prison sentence for negligent shipwreck, multiple manslaughter, and abandoning ship. A sentence which confirmed that the tragedy was not caused by a maritime accident, but by human error. But the story of the Concordia didn't end that night. For months and years, the image of that giant lying on the rocks of Giglio remained before the eyes of the world. It wasn't just a shipwreck. It was a huge burden on the environment, the economy, and collective memory. And then another challenge began, different, but equally incredible, saving the ship. It was the largest maritime engineering project ever attempted. Technicians and engineers from the whole world flocked to the island to study a plan that, until then, seemed impossible: to right and remove a ship nearly 300 meters long, resting on the fragile seabed lies just meters from the houses of Giglio. It took months of planning. An open-air construction site built around the shipwreck. Thousands of skilled workers and hundreds. Divers were working day and night. In addition to righting the ship, the environment needed to be protected. Beneath the Concordia, the sea had been damaged by the impact. Technicians positioned steel platforms to stabilize the hull, while teams of divers, they were cleaning the seabed of debris, rubble, and toxic waste. Each piece recovered. Each intervention served to return the sea and the island a part of what they had lost. In September 2013, the decisive moment arrived. The parbuckling operation, with enormous, using metal crates and a system of cables and counterweights, the Concordia was slowly straightened, centimeter by centimeter, meter by meter, until it returned to its vertical position. The whole world watched. This was a live event. For the first time since that night, the giant was no longer lying on the ground. Rocks. He was wounded, devastated, but standing. Then, in July 2014, the final journey arrived. The Concordia was towed to Genoa, escorted like a funeral procession across the sea. There, it was dismantled piece by piece until it disappeared completely. That's how its story ended. If you believe that stories like this should not be forgotten, support this project by subscribing to the channel. Thanks also to you. We can continue to tell them.